Ahead and get started. How's everybody doing? What's that? Oh, yes. So I'll say it again for the folks at home that you're all, I know, thinking that I'm an amazing artist, but I am not. I cannot draw a straight line with a ruler. This is Ben Given. I said, can you just draw a little something for me? And he came. I just saw it when I walked in. I'm like, wow, it's pretty impressive. We were supposed to write some things in it, and I don't think I want to mess with it. So I don't want to erase any of the lines. Am I too loud? Do I need to adjust volume here? Okay. So Mark asked me, I guess it was probably maybe 2 months ago, to teach a Bible study. And I ignored him for a few days, and then I said, okay. And then he scheduled me, and then I don't know if it was you, Mike, or Reese or something. And I was like, yeah, why don't you go ahead and switch me. I got out of it that month, and then this was the most I could postpone it. So needless to say, I am not the most comfortable being up here. However, I am willing to be... I'm willing to be stretched and challenged and grow. So let's just go ahead and just pray before we get started. So Father, I just thank you so much for who you are. Thank you so much for your love, for your power. I thank you for all that you are doing, that we can see, that we cannot see. We just trust you. We pray tonight that you would just open up our hearts, open up our spirits, open up our minds. And I just, I thank you for this opportunity. And I ask, Father, that this time together would be real, would be deep, would be true, and that your presence would lead and be so strong for all of us to access, Lord. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, just gonna drink some water. So I was thinking I was gonna have words on the back, so assumptuous, that's not a word, assuming of me, but so I have like multiple things here to look up different verses. But hopefully you guys, if you don't have Bibles, you have something on a mobile device or something that you can follow along. So I'll kind of give you the game plan a little bit. So I wanted to, tonight we're going to be talking out of Isaiah 11:1 pretty much, but we'll get into some of the rest of the chapter. And I kind of wanted to start just reading through that a little bit together. And we're going to look at it from a very literal biblical perspective, and then spend a good part of the night then more on the metaphorical and how does it apply to us side of things. So if you would turn with me to Isaiah 11:1, and I had looked at it in a different version. I think I'm going to pull it up here instead. Okay. So then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. And in the version that I had read, it actually said, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, and from its roots a branch will bear fruit. So just one simple verse. We're actually going to get into some of the rest of the chapter a little bit later, but I just was so struck by this concept, by the imagery of this concept, which I had my amazing husband kind of execute here. And just the overall idea of life springing from something that appears dead. Just is kind of a theme that impacts me over and over again, which is who our Father is, right? It's like it is Jesus. But so I did a little bit of a study on some of the words here, just to kind of give greater clarification. So I'm just going to kind of go through the main words here. And I told Diane, I said, if I had a title for tonight, it's shoots, roots, and fruit. I thought fruits would be good, but then that sounds a little bit weird, fruits. But Shoots, roots, and fruit. Okay, so those are the three concepts that we're going to be kind of talking about tonight. So I kind of highlighted each of those words in Blue Letter Bible, one of those online, search engines. And I'll just kind of give some clarifications on those words. So then a shoot, a branch, a twig, a rod, to grow or sprout, will spring forth, to shoot forth, to come out, to be risen, to lead out from the trunk, from the stem, trunk or stump of a tree, remaining attached to the root after the trunk is cut, of Jesse, and a branch from his root being defined as deep, absolute, permanent source or cause, will bear fruit. And fruit is was said bear fruit in the definition, which as a rule, you're not supposed to define the word with the word. But you get the concept, to grow, to increase. So in the kind of literal context of this verse, which we kind of associate with Christmas time, maybe if you've heard this verse before, or it's associated with the birth of Jesus. So the stump representing the line of Jesse, right? Obviously, Jesus was prophesied to come, or a king was prophesied to come through the line of David. So it says the stump of Jesse, right? Yeah. Sorry, I'll get my footings here in a minute. So the stump in this verse is literally representing, in the biblical context, was like this hope for a king, right? That was prophesied. And this unlikely, form from which it would come, the line of David. I mean, they were shepherds. They were nothing until, David became king. But at this time, like, the hope had kind of died. Like, they were expecting, there's all of this, and I'm not a huge, history buff, and I don't have a bunch of context for this, but, people were looking for and crying out for a warrior, a political, rebellious leader against the kind of corrupt government of the time. And so there was a lot of death in the hope of this prophecy that Isaiah had brought of a king coming forth. And then this shoot representing Jesus, right? So instead of this, king stepping into the scene, it was a baby, right? It was a vulnerable little baby. And, and the kind of references in this verse of this, a shoot coming out of a trunk of a tree. And then the roots are based in this promise prophesied, right? So the root of this stump is like the word that was spoken, and the word that came from God, that was this promise, a promised king. And his word never returns void. And then the fruit is, anybody want to take a guess? The fruit in this verse refers to Jesus, right? So the fruit of all fruit can be found in Jesus, his death, his resurrection, and then continuing on to produce and reproduce life through us, through his body. So that's kind of a very brief overview of kind of breaking down the literal meanings of each parts, the stump, the root, the shoot, and the fruit. A lot of rhyming words. So then I would like to kind of take this analogy then and dig in a little bit deeply together of what this can represent for us, his kids. What can it mean? What parallels can we imagine together of this concept of a shoot coming from a dead stump that has roots that are still alive? The thing to me that I kind of equate this stump, and we have, I don't know about you guys, but we have a lot of ash tree that grow up in our property, and we've had to cut down a lot of trees, which is sad because I love trees. And when that happens, we don't see shoots coming out because the tree was dead, and that was why we cut it down, because it was a danger, to have it standing. But when the roots, I even kind of Googled it because I was just curious, like if you chop down a tree, can it birth another tree? And it actually can, as long as the roots are alive. We can see a whole new tree come out of that. And so what are some things that we can kind of together decide that this stump can represent? So in your life personally, in general, you know, in the life of, you know, a brother, a sister, a son and daughter. And again, I wanted to write some things in here, but it's so pretty. Maybe I'll get a different color. But we're just gonna kind of start off by listing what are some things that this stump, this kind of almost dead tree looking thing, can represent for us. So what are some things, if I'm not being clear enough, that, that die, so to speak, in us, that could be represented by this? And if I got lots, if you don't have any, so I'm just going to give you a chance though first.
Are you thinking like things that we might have like hoped for that didn't?
Yeah. Sorry if I'm not being
Like
clear enough.
or-
Exactly. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead. That was on my list too. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that relationships. You said another word too, like hope, right? Like your hopes? Something that you're hoping for? Career, that's a good one. It's actually really hard to write that way. Yeah. That's feeling probably real for you right now, Tammy. I'm going to also join health with that. Health, physical, abilities. Anything else? I put, well, it goes with relationships, but I kind of even was thinking like church life, or, you know, a specific community that kind of encompasses a group of relationships. I'm going to go ahead and put dreams, plans. Anything else? I'm sorry. Goals, yeah. So basically, when any of these things, and we can keep adding to them, but basically when it gets cut off, altered, interrupted, like it doesn't turn out the way that we planned, the way that we hoped it would be, and like often we allow those areas then to completely, or what we perceive, like to die off. And sometimes we even like shut them off in our hearts, like to protect ourselves almost, you know, like close that up and like, okay, that is so painful that didn't, you know, that severed or that broke or that didn't go the way that I had planned. And it's almost, you know, dead to us, so to speak, even though that's not funny, but you know, it's a funny phrase sometimes people use. However, there is roots, right? And I did a really cool study. We're going to talk a lot about roots. Roots is kind of a passion of mine, not like literal tree roots, because that would be a weird passion to have, but just getting to roots, and you know, we'll talk about it. But when roots exist, there is a perpetual possibility. I like alliteration. Perpetual possibility, perpetual hope for there to be new life, especially because our roots are Jesus, right? Yeah, so let's talk about roots. Okay, so roots are the reason that there is potential for growth. And as dead, empty, lifeless, like, you know, this trunk without that little sprout that we'll get to, you know, coming out of it looks like, there is the possibility for life. And so there was this other, it's funny because, oh man, I switched it. Hold on. I'm going to go back to Job real quick. Job 14. I'm just going to get this ready and I'll come back to it. For there is hope for a tree, this is in Job 14:7. For there is hope for a tree when it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and its shoots will not fail. Though its roots grow old in the ground, and its stump dies in the dry soil, this is my favorite part, at the scent of water it will flourish and put forth sprigs like a plant. I just thought that was so cool and poetic because, first of all, I've never really smelled water. I don't know if you guys have. But it's almost like this instinct in us of like, the way to life, you know, the scent of water, and it springs forth like this thing that's said. And just so that, you know, that potential that lies inside of all of these things that we've laid down is established in these roots. So I kind of started to do a little bit of a science study on roots as I was kind of digging into this. And you know, it's funny because we talk a lot about root, like Jesus being our source, centering ourselves on him, like God being our foundation. Like I feel like that's a really, really important part of our verbiage here at Who. But sometimes it can be harder to identify the areas where he isn't our source, right? And so that's kind of some of the nitty-gritty that I'd like to get into a little bit tonight. So when we talk about roots, there are two different kinds. There may be more. Don't correct me if you're a science buff and you know more than me. But for our purposes tonight, there's two main kinds, and that is a taproot. Anybody heard of a taproot? Or understand the normal kinds? It's like the main guy, right? Like the big one that kind of, it goes straight down. It's strong, it's deep, it's big, typically, especially if it's part of a tree like this. And then you have another kind which is called fibrous, and I like this word, I learned it today. It's called adventitious, is another word for this kind. And this root system is, you've probably seen pictures of it where it's very like hair-like, it grows out more horizontal, it's like a whole system. And the unique thing about those kinds are also that they can grow out of any part of the plant. So you can get a fibrous root that comes off of a leaf, off of a stem. So I think that as sons and daughters, as Christians, we would probably all say, like, God is our taproot. Jesus is our taproot. Like, he is my source, you know. That sounds a little bit sarcastic. I'm not trying to be sarcastic about that. But I think that a lot of us can say that in confidence. But I think that, and what I kind of want to propose is that there are often some fibrous roots that are not anchored, you know, or tapped into this taproot that is important for us to identify and to be aware of so that we can bring them where they need to be, all in this system of like grounded and anchored in Jesus. Okay, then where do I want to go next? So in looking at roots, there are 4 different functions of roots that I had found, okay? So, and I'm gonna give you a lot of like really cheesy mantras just because of the rhyming words. So how do we know when we don't, you know, when our roots aren't where they're supposed to be? No fruit, no shoots, check the roots. Okay, so that's gonna be our first little one. No fruit, no shoots, check the roots. Okay, so the first kind of, you know, before we go into those 4 functions is like okay, so we're sensing like something is off. So when we go back to like our first verse of this, you know, the branch and then the branch producing fruit, I feel like we're gonna get to fruit next, but the fruit is kind of like that evidence of life. And so when we're not seeing evidence of life, of like the fullness of life flowing through us, that is kind of like a check for us. Like what's off? You know, what's going on? What am I missing? You know? And so I kind of began to look at these 4 different functions and relate them to our lives and like parallels with our own kind of root system. So I'll read them off to you first, and then we'll kind of get into them. But it's absorption, storage, anchoring, and conduction. Okay, those are the four functions of roots. And so absorption, obviously in a tree, what does a tree root system absorb? Water, nutrients, right? Like establishes connection with the soil, like there's things in the soil that it needs. So, so I kind of looked at absorption for us as like our influences, like where we are getting, like where we are influenced, you know, and where we're getting like sourcing some of our thought patterns or the things that we're thinking through the day. Like, what is our greatest influence in that area? And then storage, I felt like it tied a lot into our thoughts. Like, are we, you know, I love, like that Philippians 4:8 verse, like whatsoever is true, noble, honest, just, I'm just throwing all the adjectives in there, but like think on these things. Or are we storing up like records of wrong, of like unforgiveness? Are we keeping track of things that are, you know, actually causing death to our soul? That seems a little bit dark, but, and then anchoring, like I view as like time spent with the Father versus not time spent with the Father. And in that space, like allowing, like the you know, kind of the tipping the scales of the opposite of that, like is allowing my emotions or my thoughts to lead rather than being anchored in my time with my Father. And like here often like reactions or, you know, are often symptoms or responses to a root, to something deeper. And so sometimes it's really easy to like react to people's reactions. This happened to Ben and I actually this week where we had something, you know, without going into too much detail, we had, you know, one of our children expressed something to us that we're like, automatically both of us like, that is not true. Like that is not a part of your reality. That is like, we actually got mad, both of us, because we're like, that is not a true statement, you know? It almost felt like an accusation, and we're like, that's not our family, you know, that's, you know. But then I'm like, take a minute, breathe, right? And, you know, sitting down and talking through it with, you know, with this child of ours, and it's like, oh, okay, you know, this is not the thing, like, but we were able to get to the thing, you know. But it's like, so often it's really easy to react to other people's reactions, which are like their symptoms or the things going on. And instead, like, there's something underneath, there's a root that is really the thing that we want to see healed and restored to like that place with the Father. And then my favorite one, I think, is conduction. Okay, so anybody know what that means, like in terms of a tree, like conduction, what is that function? It's like basically, okay, so you absorb all the water and the nutrients, but then they actually transport it, like to the other, you know, parts of the tree. And so I was thinking about this one. I'm like, okay, that one's tricky. How do I relate that one, you know? But I think the thought that came to me was that we like get stopped up when we don't allow the Father to flow through us. And so sometimes like the kind of thinking like, I have enough on my plate, I cannot handle one more thing. Like, I mean, anybody's been there? I've definitely been there. Maybe you are there, you know, but there's an aspect, and I'm not saying that there's not different, you know, seasons in our life where we can, you know, we need to kind of rest. But overall, I feel like that kind of thinking can rob us from realizing that we always have something to give. And like it is through the giving, it's through like that sacrifice of like service that we actually get filled up. We think it's going to be draining. We think it's going to be like suck the life out of us because we can't handle anything else. But it's actually like when we allow the Father to flow through us, that conduction process, we get filled back up. So I don't know, for me that was kind of a cool revelation. So, what was I going to say next? Okay, so those are kind of some of the areas that we can look at in terms of, in terms of roots, and areas that can kind of throw us for a loop, or areas where we're not flowing freely, like love is not flowing through that area, or we're not seeing the results that we feel like we're putting the attention to. And then just being able to kind of identify some of those areas and then like bring back to center, like, okay, this needs to be brought back into line into the taproot. And so then, like, when we talk about this concept of like a branch sprouting out and the opportunity for life when the roots are deep and strong and founded where they're supposed to be, I wanted to talk a little bit more about like what does fruit look like? Because we obviously know, the list, right? The fruits of the Spirit. Anybody want to go ahead? And I'm just going to like, I'll just like, love, joy, peace. I know.
There was a song. I memorized the song.
Patience.
Kindness.
Was that?
Goodness.
Self-control. Goodness. Gentleness. I'm totally ruining Ben's picture with my terrible handwriting. Faithfulness. Wow, you are killing it, Orpha.
Listen, Leslie Gabler taught me this. It's 3 1-syllables, 3 2-syllables, and 3 3-syllables. So
3 1-syllables, 3 2-syllables,
patience, kindness, goodness, and then gentleness.
3 3-syllables. Ah, that's good. Did we put faithfulness? We did. So, we know this list, right? And it's funny because they're called fruits of the Spirit, but I actually think that they're like the spirit behind the fruit, right? So like you can't like see peace or patience, but like it's the feeling, like it's the spirit behind that act or that, state of being. And so, I mean, I don't know, can you guys think of some examples of what is a manifestation of these fruits? Like in your home, in your job, like what does any one of these look like when it's the right spirit, this fruit of the Spirit?
I just think of like when these things are working, like there's a certain calmness that I feel. Like nothing's rushed. Whereas it feels like time is slowed down, and there's like this complete feeling of like being locked in.
That's
with whatever
awesome.
it is that I'm doing. Whereas the opposite, like it's not.
It's like
working,
chaotic
it's
or,
frantic and very fragile.
yeah. Has anybody felt the difference in your home when there's like something you're working through with your spouse versus when there's complete peace or oneness? I mean, you can kind of get that contrast. Same thing with my kids. I know like when there's kind of contention happening versus, our relationships are kind of exuding that sense of peace or joy or love. Like you can feel the difference. Anybody have another example of like joy? Yeah.
I remember in the past, I was walking around and I was just happy. And then I realized, well, why are you happy enough? And then you realize it's the joy of the Lord.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's just like you.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a feeling and a place of being. There is, I wanted to kind of go into this next section in Isaiah 11, actually, so that follows immediately this verse. So a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots, a branch will bear fruit. So continuing on, and this is a little bit different just because I grabbed a Bible from the kids' room, and this is, I think, NIV, but the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, Jesus, the branch, the fruit. Actually, it's kind of funny because Jesus is the roots, the branch and the fruit. So the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of power, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. This is a part that I really wanted to get to. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness is his belt, faithfulness the sash around his waist, which is basically like speaking out in this metaphorical language every single fruit of the Spirit. And then this next section is that, I'm sure you guys have read this before, where the wolf will live with the lamb and the leopard with the goat, and the nursing child will put their arm down the hole of the cobra, and a child will lead it all. So I'm not reading, I'm paraphrasing there, but I felt like, this concept was kind of established of like life birthing from what seems like death, and like how do you get to the fruit? And I felt like it was just kind of outlined this perfect way that Jesus walked, which to me came down to that I'm going to find it again, sorry. Like judging not by what you see or by what you hear, but like the very life of, his Father within him. And so when we look at fruit, it's like, okay, what is the quality of fruit? We talked about it. What is the spirit behind like what fruit is producing? The other thing is like in Genesis 1:12, it talks about when he was like speaking the world into existence, and he was speaking the trees with the fruit into existence. He specifically said like bearing fruit with the seed in them, like yielding fruit whose seed is in it according to its own kind. So it's like fruit begets fruit. Like fruit doesn't just like look pretty on the branch and then taste good in the end, but like it continually produces life. It continually begets life. It reproduces over and over as the nature of fruit, because it has the seed of its own kind inside of it to continue on. And so I was kind of thinking, like, I feel like a natural view for us, for me specifically, Ben and I in this phase is like, of like the most tangible example of fruit would be my kids, because like they literally are like the result of, of us, but like also then as they're growing up and becoming who God created them to be, like we can like speak out to them that they also, like as fruit, have the ability to reproduce, not in a literal sense. Too soon, but but just like within every fruit is the nature to like be fruit, right? To recreate fruit and like this life of the Father. And so even in our kids, like we have the opportunity to like help them recognize the power they have in them of who they are, to continue to like seed love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, all those, those things. So do you guys have any thoughts about fruit and how to recognize that, or how you've, maybe times you've recognized, I'm supposed to be using this microphone. I had you guys share and I wasn't using this, so sorry. I'm gonna turn it on and no one's gonna have anything to say. But yeah, what are you, because I think the reason why this was like on my heart tonight was, I think sometimes we like use these words a lot and like we go really accustomed to them, like fruit and like source and root and all of these things, but it's like, I just want to know, like, what does it look like? Like, how do we live it? And we're doing that together and as, our different family units. But sometimes I think it's just really important, and it almost feels like contrary, like we don't want to focus on the negative, but sometimes it is really important to recognize, okay, what is not fruit? So that I can go down like to the root and like, where is my root off? Like, why is this area of my life not producing fruit? Why am I not seeing life? Something, let's dig down deep and let's get to the source. Let's get to the reason and realign to the source. So So yeah, I just wanted to pause for a second. Does anybody have thoughts about that, or thoughts about, yeah.
Is this working? Okay.
Yeah.
It is. So it goes to what you were saying about what we're sourced in. So like just thinking about times when what I've been sourced in is stuff that might be really interesting to me, but I know it's not good. And that's where I start to see that really like negative fruit, we'll say like the poisonous apple or whatever we want to say it, but like to where I'm producing and I can feel it, like I'm producing negative fruit. And then I'm seeing my kids or I'm seeing the people around me taking bites of that, and I'm seeing the effect that it has on them. There's been multiple times where that's like really scared me, to realize that I can be that influential. And I can be that easily influenced by the negative fruit. And then counter to that, times where I'm like intentionally sourced in we all want to say we're sourced in God, but I can definitely feel that part of it, but also the other things that I'm putting my time and energy into, I know are way more positive, or the interactions I'm having with people are way more intentional. And these people, they have those fruits of the Spirit, like I see it in them. And that becomes an infectious thing, and I'm feeding off of that. And then again, the fruit that I feel like I'm producing, the people closest to me are benefiting off of that. And that's just such an inspiration to maintain the production of the good fruit.
Yeah.
When you see it actually happening around you, and you see what it's doing. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, yeah. Just point towards that. Don't cough too loud. I didn't need it. As I was kind of thinking through some of these, you mentioned like influences. I remember Mark talking about like this concept of like how God intentionally created us to be influenced. Like he created our hearts to be soft, to be able to turn, to be able to respond to him and to him and one another. But how often that can get, confused or misinterpreted. And I just thought of a good example of like, my son, Jonah, especially when kids, I think that they pick up on the atmosphere and they pick up on, how we always say like it's not the thing, but the spirit of the thing. Like they can pick up on the spirit of the room, but not always understand it. I mean, us as adults, we don't even always understand it. But I remember when we were living in California and he was younger, there was a family that we spent a good amount of time with there, and they had 4 rambunctious boys, and obviously he then was working a ton, and so he was literally Jonah was like surrounded by girls only at all times, so he loved spending time with his family. And they loved him, and so they would ask me like, hey, can he sleep over? Can we take him for the day? And I was like, yeah, sure, But anyway, I kind of started to notice this like pattern of like him coming home angry after being around them. And I knew it wasn't him, and I started to like recognize, it was at this point where I started to kind of like also verbally like teach him like to make his own kind of connections and awareness of like, there was stuff going on in their home with, the dad and stuff that we didn't come to find out till a little bit later, that, he was picking up on kind of things that were going on that were not being spoken out loud at all. It wasn't like he was exposed to something in terms of like, but he was picking up on the atmosphere of that home, the spirit of that home, and things that were going on in that home. And then to be able to recognize, first of all, how sensitive his heart and spirit is, but then also like how important it is to guide that and to be aware of that. And I think that for us too, sometimes we're like, why do I feel this way? Like what's going on? Why am I, but then to begin to like ask, begin to ask the Father, like, okay, show me the root of this. Because first of all, it's not even just yes, maybe for like 10-year-old Jonah, it's important to protect him from an environment, but a lot of times, especially as maturing sons and daughters, like we're called to influence that place, not to be influenced by it. So once we can become aware and discern like the Spirit, then we can begin to like have a positive, influence into that. And I remember actually that one of the stories of the Bible that I love is Daniel, and I love the story of Daniel. I did a study with a group of teenage girls years ago where we did like a Beth Moore study of Daniel, and I just learned so much. But when we're talking about like identifying roots, and I feel like anybody who's spent any time with me or, we've prayed together or whatever, like I'm always, that's why I said I'm passionate about roots. I'm always like, okay, well, let's get to the root of it. Let's find the root. Like, where is this coming from? Like finding the thing beneath the surface and like the thing down deep that will actually like reveal the healing that needs to be done, that needs to happen. But like kind of an obvious, obvious, not obvious, answer to the question of like how do we find the root is like ask Jesus and believe that he will show you. And so in Daniel 2:28, like there's that whole scene where do you remember where he like there was something, oh gosh, I don't remember the details now. I should have like checked back into it. But there was like a dream that Nebuchadnezzar was going to kill somebody if all the people couldn't like interpret his dream. And so they all came to him because they knew he was, around town interpreting dreams. And they were like, you gotta, help us or this guy's gonna kill us. This is the Jem paraphrase, And so he asked the Lord for the meaning of the dream, and he gave the dream. And then, he was elevated in all of this through, this whole different place from where he came from. But Daniel 2:22 talks about there is a God who reveals secrets. And I find that like my heart and soul comes back to that so many times, especially when there's things that we cannot see, where that we cannot like know or grasp with our minds, but you sense it and you know that there's something deeper. And like God, our Father, is the revealer of secrets. And if we just ask him, he can kind of help reveal like this whole root thing and the areas that need to be healed. Another thing that I felt like, and I'd love to hear, if you guys have other things that, again, my goal is not to try to like focus on the negative, but I do think that we, like by talking through some of these things, like we can help each other and like help avoid like pitfalls. But I don't know about you guys, but like I have found that like the places of like silence can be the places where things multiply. So like if I wake up in the middle of the night, which happens from time to time, and I start thinking, if I don't go right back to sleep and I start thinking about things that I'm worried about in that space where like nobody else is, obviously my husband's right next to me, but he's asleep and he's not like, like things seem huge. Like, I go to places in my mind sometimes that could probably scare you, but like just the reality seems almost like amplified, right? Of like what the possibility could be in terms of like a negative. Does anybody? Okay. Yeah. So I think that there's something, but then it's so funny. I've had this experience more than once where I like wake up and I was like, whoa, like I can remember exactly what I was thinking and feeling, and I could see it in a completely different light as like, that's not reality. That's not like, that's not truth, But I have, this example of, this story that I kind of wanted to share where there was a friend one time that, came to me, and it was like, the point of this is like in silence, like there's so much strength when we can like say things out loud and we can like find a safe place to like share the things that we're fearing or that are, our anxieties or things that we're struggling with. And I think there's so much like power in that silence. There's so much power for things to be amplified and for shame to be compounded on top of the thing you're already worrying about. And so, this one time, like somebody came to me, and this was years and years and years ago, and like pulled me into like a room, locked the door, like pulled down the shades, and like, I don't want to say any of this out loud, but there's like, this person was married, and she's like, there's this guy, and he gave me his number, and I could just feel something, and then like she started telling me the story, and literally she all of a sudden stopped, and she just burst out laughing. And I was like thinking, okay, what's going on? And she was like, this is nothing. This is the most ridiculous thing. Like, it had all of this power and all of this shame compounding in her. And like, in her mind, she's thinking, am I thinking about something? Am I entertaining like this idea, this thought? And then as soon as she said it out loud to someone, like it was like the power was gone. Like, it was funny. It was like literal, extreme reaction of laughter. And like, I just always come back to that example of like shame or fear or anxiety will like keep us quiet, and in that place like things are multiplied, but like there's so much power in speaking it out loud to somebody that you love, somebody that you trust, and where things like literally shrink down to nothing. And so I don't know, I just felt like tonight, more than anything, my heart is to encourage us all that there is no place when the root and like the source of life, of all life, is in us. There is no place that we've signed off as dead, as broken, as like done, as finished. There is no place where there's not the potential for life to sprout forth, for fruit to spring from the branches. And so I don't know, I just thought like here together, and there's just a handful of us, so maybe we could even get in a smaller group, but I really would like us to pray for one another and to like speak into, like nobody has to share anything if they don't want to, but if you do want to share like specific areas where you've like feel have been dead, or hopes have died, or dreams have died, and you like want to say out loud, like, I want to see life in this place. Like, I want us to do that together and believe for that together. And if I don't have enough faith to believe that for myself, like, I know that like Ashley can believe, like her faith can like speak life to my faith. So I want to do that, if you guys are open to that. Before I do that, I just wanted to just open up any last, thoughts or things that maybe come to your mind as we're kind of talking through this. I wrote another one down. The shoots need the right roots, or there's no fruits. I just can't stop. It's like a Dr. Seuss thing. No fruit, no shoots, check the roots. And then the shoots need the right, wait, hold on, now I lost it. The shoots need the right roots, or there's no fruits. What? I don't know, that might be one step beyond my capabilities. Some beatboxing. I can maybe, pentatonics, we send it to pentatonics for some. So yeah, any other thoughts on this topic or anything, any topics? Oh yeah, it's there.
Something that came to mind.
Oh, whoops, I wonder if it goes off automatically.
So something that came to mind to me, and I've thought this analogy a lot, like even for Orpha and I, because when we first got married, we were like in constant transition. So we were, I think of it as like we were the stump that was just in a pot. And we weren't committed to like where we were going to be living, like career. We were constantly like thinking about that. So a lot of the stuff that we wrote on there, it was just like constant, like just felt like constant chaos. And it really felt like there came this point where we were like, all right, it's time to put the roots in the ground. Like, it's time to get out of the pot, because when you're in the pot, there's so much more vulnerability. There's not enough room for the roots to grow. It's limited, and it needs constant attention, like way more attention. It's much needier. Its needs are constant. And in the ground, and I think that's, the analogy of this right here, it's like the roots have so much more room to grow, and it's so much more sustainable. When you're in there and you think about how God is, it's like, when you really know the Lord, like you know the Lord, and there's not this doubt. But when you're in the pot, it's like it's so much more insecure. to how you feel, and your needs are so much greater. So that's just kind of what comes to mind when I'm looking at that too.
Yeah, and I think as you were talking, I kind of realized also, like we talked a lot about like the stump, the roots, and the fruit, but sometimes like the place of, like maybe we should talk for, just a quick minute of like what does the sprout look like before fruit? And then like how do you hold on to that growth, like believing for fruit before you see the fruit? It's like, and the analogy can kind of be like just there's hope for something that you allowed that hope for something to die, but there's still not fruit there in that. We're still not seeing the thing that you hoped for. So just allowing like the Father's love to grow in that waiting place and trusting. And again, that your foundation is solid. That your roots, are in Him and not in these other kind of distracting areas that you like. Sometimes there could be a long time between the sprout and the fruit, right? But trusting, and not being alone in it, joining in with others until you see, like you could begin to, like you continue to sow until you see that place of that fruit. It was just kind of something I realized we didn't talk about that middle stage so much. And sometimes the middle stage is the longest stage, right? So I don't know. I guess they left us alone with all the tech stuff. I'm kind of thinking I'm just going to turn off my mic. And I know that we're like live, but sorry, friends out there. Yeah, of course.
It's funny because this is such a great drawing. I think you did a great job.
Then Horva said you're an amazing artist. Go ahead.
I keep staring at it, and I like everything that you said, but I just keep thinking of like the same thing, which is I picture someone who like grew up in the church. They have the roots, but I specifically have a family member who is completely veered away. They are completely against God. They are married to an unbeliever, and so I feel like their tree's been chopped. But it gives me hope that there can be an offshoot.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you are part of that root system, like just being in their life and like loving them and being, who you are. I mean, I don't know how much interaction you have with them, but there is, and like, again, that is like my number one like prayer, that we walk away with like this hope alive, that there is perpetual possibility for new life when the roots are in Him. And so there is, I don't know, it's so funny. I remember like, I think it's just so powerful. Like hope is so powerful. And that verse that says, hope never disappoints. And, we could all probably sit here and talk about different stories or situations or relationships in our life where, I mean, I can tell you mine, that feels very hopeless. And I'm just like praying that life is just renewed in all of us for hope, that there is perpetual possibility for new life in every dead area when He is our root and He is our, the source. So thank you for sharing that. And we'll believe with you. And maybe that's one of the things that we can kind of pray together too in our circle. So, so I'm just going to turn off the microphone. Hopefully that's okay. And then maybe, would you guys mind if we just like got into a little circle or something? And if you don't feel comfortable with that, don't feel the pressure to. But let's just, since we're a nice small group, we'll just pray together and then we can just kind of end this way. It's 8 o'clock. So I made it longer than I thought. I was like, an hour and a half is a really long time to talk about something.